On February 26, 1959, a rescue team skiing through the northern Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union stumbled upon a sight that froze their blood. They found a tent half buried in the snow on the slope of a mountain the locals called Kolat-Syakhl, the Dead Mountain. The tent was empty, but it wasn't just abandoned. It had been slashed open from the inside. Inside the tent, the searchers found boots, heavy jackets, cameras, and food laid out for a meal. The hikers who had slept there had fled into the night, into a blizzard where the temperature was 30 degrees below zero, without their shoes. They had run for their lives. But from what? Welcome to the dreamscape of history. Dim the lights, wrap yourself in something warm, and let us venture into the white silence. The story begins happily enough. In late January, a group of 10 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out for a ski expedition. They were not amateurs. They were grade 2 hikers, experienced, tough, and young. They were led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, a brilliant engineer and a natural leader. Their goal was to reach Mount Otertan, a name that translates from the Mansi language as "don't go there." One hiker, Yuri Yudin, turned back early due to joint pain. He hugged his friends goodbye, joking that they should save some food for him when they returned. He had no idea that he was hugging ghosts. He was the only one who would ever come off that mountain alive. The group moved efficiently through the wilderness. We know this because they left behind diaries and cameras. The photos show happy faces, young men and women laughing in the snow, playing mandolins and hugging huge pine trees. They were full of life. On February 1st, they began their ascent of the pass. The weather turned worse. Violent winds whipping snow into a blinding white wall. They lost their bearings slightly and drifted west towards the slope of Kolat-Syakhl. Realizing their mistake, Dyatlov made a fateful decision. Instead of skiing down to the tree line where there was shelter and wood for a fire, he ordered them to set up camp right there on the exposed slope. Perhaps he wanted to practice a slope camping technique, or perhaps he didn't want to lose the altitude they had gained. They pitched the large canvas tent, laid out their skis as a floor, and settled in for dinner. They took off their wet boots, stripped down to thermal underwear, and prepared to sleep. The diaries end there. The rest of the story is written in the snow and in the autopsy reports. Something happened that night, something so terrifying that 9 experienced mountaineers cut their way out of their own shelter with knives and ran, some in just socks, some with one boot on, down the slope towards the tree line, a mile away in the pitch-black darkness. The rescue team followed the footprints. They led down the slope to the edge of the forest, beneath a large Siberian cedar tree. There they found the first 2 bodies, Yuri Krivonishenchenko and Yuri Doroshenko. They were stripped to their underwear, lying next to the remains of a small, desperate fire. The branches of the cedar tree were broken up to a height of 5 meters. It looked like the men had been frantically climbing the tree, snapping off branches to feed the fire, or perhaps climbing to look back at the tent, to look at whatever was chasing them. Between the cedar tree and the tent, 3 more bodies were found: Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. They were found at different intervals, lying face up in the snow. Their poses suggested they were trying to crawl back to the tent. They had died of hypothermia. Slobodin had a crack in his skull, but it wasn't fatal. It seemed like a tragic but understandable disaster, a panic followed by freezing. But 2 months later, the snow melted, and the searchers found the other 4 hikers deeper in the woods, in a ravine. and that is when the story turned into a nightmare. The last 4 hikers, Dubinina, Zolotaryov, Kolovatov, and Thibaut Brignol, were found buried under 4 meters of snow in a creek bed. They were better dressed than the others, wearing clothes apparently stripped from the dead bodies at the cedar tree. But their injuries were baffling. They didn't die of the cold. They died of massive internal trauma. Thibaut Brignol had a crushed skull. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had multiple broken ribs. The medical examiner compared the force required to cause such damage to a car crash. Yet, strangely, there were no external bruises. It was as if they had been crushed by a high-pressure wave. And then, the gruesome details. Ludmila Dubinina was missing her tongue and her eyes. The tissue was gone. Zolotaryov was also missing his eyeballs. To add to the mystery, traces of radiation were found on their clothes, and family members at the funerals reported that the skin of the victims had turned a deep, strange orange color, and their hair had turned gray. The Soviet government closed the case abruptly. The official cause of death was listed as a compelling natural force. The area was sealed off for 3 years. The files were sent to a secret archive. What happened on the Mountain of the Dead? Was it an avalanche, a secret military test, a localized infrasound panic caused by the wind, or something ancient that lives in the Ural snow? The wind still howls through the Dyatlov Pass, but it keeps its secrets. To understand the horror of the Dyatlov Pass, we must try to reconstruct the impossible. For 60 years, investigators have tried to fit the puzzle pieces together, but they always seem to belong to different puzzles. The most widely accepted theory, the one supported by modern Russian inquiries, is the avalanche. It suggests that a slab of snow, released by the cut the hikers made to pitch their tent, slid down in the night. It smashed into the tent, crushing Dubinina and Zolotaryov where they slept, cracking their ribs. In this version, the hikers cut their way out in a panic, fearing a second wave. They dragged their injured friends down the slope to the tree line. But the night was too cold. They couldn't start a fire big enough. One by one, they froze. It is a logical explanation, but it has holes. The slope of Kolovatsyakl was only about 30 degrees, usually too shallow for an avalanche. The tent was found collapsed, but not buried, and most damning of all, the footprints leading away from the tent were calm. They were walking, not running. If an avalanche had just crushed your ribs, how do you walk a mile down a mountain in deep snow? If nature didn't kill them, perhaps man did. There is a theory that the hikers stumbled into something they weren't supposed to see. We know that the group included Semyon Zolotaryov, a mysterious figure much older than the students, with a military background and tattoos that were not documented in his syllabus records. Some believe he was a KGB agent. On the night of the incident, another group of hikers, camped 30 miles away, reported seeing strange, glowing orange spheres floating in the sky over Kolovatsyakl. This aligns with the orange skin found on the bodies. Was it a parachute mine test? A failed rocket launch? The theory suggests the hikers were hit by the shock wave of a low-altitude explosion, causing the internal injuries without external marks. The radiation on their clothes supports this. The blindness and missing eyes could be the work of scavenging birds or the result of a chemical weapon that burned soft tissue. In this version, the government swept in, not to investigate, but to sanitize. But there is a quieter, more psychological killer that haunts the mountains. It is called the Kármán vortex street. The shape of the dead mountain is peculiar. When high winds hit the dome shape at the perfect angle, they can shear off, creating spinning vortices of air. These vortices can generate infrasound. sound waves at a frequency so low that humans cannot hear them, but we can feel them. Infrasound creates a physical reaction in the body. It causes nausea, anxiety, and an overwhelming, irrational sense of doom. It vibrates the eyeballs, causing hallucinations. Imagine the students sitting in the dark tent. The wind is howling outside, but suddenly they feel a crushing dread. They feel watched. They feel like the mountain itself is screaming at them to leave. Panic sets in. Irrational fear becomes an irrational flight. They rip the tent open, desperate to escape the sound that is vibrating inside their own skulls. They run into the cold, fleeing a monster that is nothing more than the wind. And finally, we must address the most disturbing detail: the undressing. Why were the bodies found in their underwear? Why did they strip in the freezing cold? Medical science calls it paradoxical undressing. As the body enters the final stages of hypothermia, the muscles controlling the blood vessels in the extremities fail. Blood rushes back into the frozen limbs. The victim, moments from death, feels a sudden, burning wave of heat. They feel like they are burning alive. In their delirium, they rip off their clothes to cool down. It is a cruel biological trick, a final burst of warmth before the heart stops forever. We may never know the absolute truth. The Dyatlov Pass remains a Rorschach test for our fears. Do you fear the cold? Then it was an avalanche. Do you fear the government? Then it was the KGB. Do you fear the unknown? Then it was the mountain itself. The only thing we know for certain is that 9 young people went up the mountain and 9 ghosts came down.